Hey guys, I know, clickbaity title, but it's true. And I'll show you that I did in fact get an MSE. So how did we get here? I think what I'll do is I'll put in a clip. I actually recorded a video while I was at the office before I went into his office to get this MSE installed. Kind of going through how this came about, a little background on it. So I'm going to put that, and you guys can watch that, and then we'll come back to this. Originally, I came up here to get my TPD repositioned. You can see that there was a little bit of the last two molars, the alveolar bone that the last two molars are, fixed to. That portion was starting to slightly tilt out. And it was intentional. He placed it sort of asymmetrically in the beginning so that he could correct the crossbite that existed on that side. And it really just did too good of a job. So it kept going a little bit further. So originally I came up here to get the bar repositioned into a higher position in the palatal vault, so that it would kind of ease off that segment and focus more on nasal cavity expansion by placing it higher up in the vault. But then in the last week or so, I started thinking to myself, if the goal is to kind of position these expansionary forces as high up in the vault as possible, another goal of mine was to further minimize any chance of alveolar bone being pushed or moved. Then I thought, what if I were to go with the MSE instead? And the reason it makes sense now is that I've already been activated with the ease, meaning that my mid-palatal suture and the other circummaxillary sutures are released and they are soft, loose. So the MSE installed at this stage won't encounter that initial great amount of resistance to try to break apart the suture, not just the mid-palatal one, but other sutures as well. And it might actually make sense to continue the expansion with that and really focus the forces that are being directed at the roof of the palate, right? The MSE is installed at the highest point in the vault. If you look at the TPD, the arms are attached to the side walls of the maxilla. It's still high up, but you can't get any higher up than the MSE because of where it's drilled into, which is right next to the suture line on the roof of the vault. So I was thinking about this, and I essentially just texted him a couple days ago and, just kind of came up with this thought and asked him, does this make sense? We chatted back and forth, and he's very collaborative and open to experimentation if you understand the risks and you do the research around what you're asking for, and if it's within reason. And another misconception that kind of goes along with all this is that I think myself and a lot of people as well, I think that Dr. Lee with the ease procedure only does TPDs, the transpalatal distractor. That's not necessarily true. In fact, ease really just stands for endoscopically assisted surgical expansion. It doesn't really tie to a particular type of device. Of course, he preferentially uses the TPD, but he will use whatever device makes sense for that particular case, that particular skeletal structure of the person. Sometimes people have a difficult time turning the TPD, so he'll use the MSE on them instead because it's easier to expand. Again, and I think this is important because there's this lot of debates around what's better, what's a better device, and really it's so contextual that the question, is one better than the other in isolation in a vacuum, doesn't really make sense. You really have to understand your own bone structure and what your goals are, and then weigh the pros and cons of each type of expansionary device for your case, and then go with what makes sense and what's feasible. The MSE is still not without risk for me. I have thin upper maxillary bone, so there's a risk of something called cheese wiring, which I learned just yesterday as a term. Essentially, it comes from, it's the effect of like running a wire across cheese. But how it applies here is that there is a chance that the TADs for the MSE would erode through the bone, like kind of drag through the bone, instead of being solidly anchored and pushing the two halves of the maxilla apart. And I knew about this risk. I think I even mentioned it in my first video. But I think that the risk is mitigated, or there's a lower chance of that now that all the sutures are released and there's less resistance. So it's an experiment, right? We're gonna try this out and see if this is a successful and effective way to continue the expansion. If not, then we'll go back to the TPD. But yeah, I'm gonna hop in there and I'll follow this up with a video afterwards. All right, so here's the follow-up video. First off, good news is that the asymmetry is relapsing. It's been about 2 weeks since I had the MSE installed, and that portion, the alveolar bone that had the two right molars, is starting to tilt back and go back into a normal position. So that's good. The other thing I want to mention is that, and I did talk about this in another video, but I went into the procedure with an existing asymmetry, the posterior crossbite, but I want to call out that that's sort of just the tip of the iceberg. When you have an improper bite for upwards of maybe 20 years, you start to develop other asymmetries across the entire body, the posterior chain, down to even your hips, your leg. And I think I've had these sort of functional asymmetries for the larger portion of a decade or longer. And it all stems from not having had a proper bite to begin with. And my upper arch was always smaller than my lower arch, so I couldn't really have a bite if I wanted to. So for me, expansion was the only way to even have a chance at having a normal occlusal, plane, and also a normal bite. And I think that once that phase is here, after I finish expanding and we do whatever we need to do, whether it's some forward movement or just using TADs to level the occlusal plane and have a proper bite, then we're gonna start to see other asymmetry start to correct itself over time. It's sort of a cascade effect. And I will be working with cranial osteopaths, craniosacral therapists during this process to help guide the skeletal movements that are happening. Yeah, I think that's it.